The sun bleeds across the Judean hills, painting the sky in hues of fire and ash. Three silhouettes stand stark against the dying light, monuments to suffering, to sacrifice, to a story etched into the very bedrock of Western civilization. For millennia we have been told this story, whispered it in hushed tones, carved it into stone, painted it onto stained glass. We believe we know it. Every agonizing detail, every tear, every drop of blood. But what if the story you think you know is merely a shadow? A veil drawn across a truth far more profound, far more unsettling, and infinitely more liberating. Imagine, for a moment, that the most public spectacle in human history, an event witnessed by thousands, recorded by scribes, and debated by scholars for 2,000 years, contained within its very heart the most secret of revelations. A revelation not meant for the masses, but for those with eyes to see and ears to hear, beyond the clamor of dogma and the comfort of convention. This is not a tale of simple faith, but of profound understanding, a journey into the heart of esoteric wisdom. Ancient whispers, echoing from forgotten scrolls and hidden caves, speak of a different kind of salvation, not one achieved through external acts or ritualistic sacrifice, but through an awakening within. He who finds himself finds life, and life is gnosis. But he who does not find himself does not find life. These words, attributed to the very figure at the center of that desolate hill, hint at a wisdom that transcends the physical, a knowledge that liberates the soul from the confines of a world often perceived as a prison. They speak of a divine spark, an inner light, obscured by layers of ignorance and illusion, waiting to be rekindled. We are taught of two criminals, two nameless figures condemned to share the ultimate humiliation alongside the Nazarene. One, a mocker. The other, a penitent, granted a fleeting promise of paradise. But what if this penitent was far more than a mere brigand seeking last-minute absolution? What if his story, largely erased from the popular narrative, holds the key to unlocking the deepest mysteries of that fateful day? What if he was not just a criminal but a seeker, whose destiny intertwined with the Master's in a way official history never dared to tell? A life shaped by an encounter in childhood, leading to a shared fate on the cross, revealing a truth that defies centuries of conventional belief. For too long, these deeper currents of understanding have been relegated to the shadows, dismissed as fringe beliefs, or worse, condemned as dangerous heresies. Yet, within these so-called forbidden interpretations lies a profound coherence, a spiritual logic that resonates with the deepest yearnings of the human heart. They speak of a universe far more complex, a divine reality far more intricate, and a human potential far more expansive than the simplified narratives often allow. They challenge us to look beyond the surface, to question the established order, and to seek the truth not in external pronouncements, but in the quiet whispers of our own inner being. The very act of crucifixion, so often presented as a singular, agonizing sacrifice, takes on a startling new meaning when viewed through the lens of gnosis. It becomes a profound allegory, a cosmic drama playing out not just on a wooden cross, but within the soul of every individual. It speaks of the spirit's struggle against the material world, of the journey from darkness to light, from ignorance to true knowledge, and in this reimagined narrative, the figure of the good thief emerges not as a passive recipient of grace, but as an active participant in a spiritual awakening, a testament to the transformative power of gnosis, even in the face of ultimate despair. His final moments were not just about repentance, but about recognition, a recognition of the true nature of reality and of the divine spark within himself and within the one beside him. This journey we are about to embark upon will peel back the layers of conventional understanding, revealing a tapestry woven with threads of ancient wisdom, forgotten encounters, and a destiny forged in the crucible of both human suffering and divine revelation. It is a story that begins not with a miracle, but with a simple yet profound meeting between a boy and a young man, a meeting that would echo through decades, culminating in an unimaginable shared fate on the most infamous hill in history. Prepare to question everything you thought you knew, for the true story of the cross is not just about a man who died, but about the knowledge that truly sets us free. The Judean landscape, parched and ancient, was a crucible of competing realities in the 1st century. Roman legions, with their iron discipline and pagan gods, imposed a brutal order, crushing dissent with swift, merciless efficiency. Yet beneath this veneer of imperial control, a vibrant, often volatile spiritual ferment simmered. The air itself seemed thick with prophecy, messianic expectation, and a profound yearning for liberation. But liberation from what, exactly? For many, it was freedom from Roman tyranny. For others, it was deliverance from sin, promised by the rigid interpretations of the temple establishment. But for a select few, a hidden current flowed beneath the surface, speaking of a far deeper, more existential bondage. This was the world into which our story unfolds, a world ripe for a different kind of revelation. It was a world where the very fabric of reality was questioned by those who dared to look beyond the obvious. They were the Gnostics, a diverse tapestry of thinkers and mystics, whose insights, though often fragmented and esoteric, offered a radical reinterpretation of creation itself. They believed that the world we inhabit, this physical realm of suffering, decay, and illusion, was not the perfect creation of an all-good, all-knowing God. Instead, they posited the existence of a lesser, imperfect deity, often referred to as the demiurge. This demiurge, a kind of cosmic craftsman, was seen as arrogant and ignorant, believing himself to be the supreme God, yet having inadvertently trapped divine sparks of light, true spiritual essence, within the material forms of his flawed creation. Imagine the profound implications of such a belief. If this world is a prison, then our very existence within it is a form of captivity. The laws, the rituals, the societal structures, even the very concept of sin as taught by conventional religion, could be seen as further chains, designed to keep humanity bound to the demiurge's dominion. The true salvation, then, was not about appeasing an external god or following rigid commandments, but about escaping this cosmic prison. And the key to that escape was gnosis, not mere intellectual knowledge, but a direct, intuitive, experiential knowing of one's true divine origin, a remembrance of the light within. In this spiritual landscape, Jesus of Nazareth emerged not merely as a prophet or a messiah in the traditional sense, but as a revealer. His teachings, particularly those preserved in texts outside the canonical scriptures, hint at a profound understanding of this hidden reality. He was, for the Gnostics, a guide sent from the true, ultimate God, the Pleroma, to awaken humanity to its divine heritage. His purpose was not to die for sins in a sacrificial atonement, but to illuminate the path to gnosis, to show individuals how to recognize the divine spark within themselves and transcend the limitations of the material world. His parables, his miracles, even his very presence were seen as metaphors for this inner awakening, this journey from ignorance to enlightened self-knowledge. It was into this complex, often turbulent spiritual environment that a young man named Dismas was born. Not the simple brigand of popular law, but a soul deeply attuned to the injustices and hypocrisies that permeated his world. From a young age, Dismas possessed a keen, almost unnerving perception. He saw through the pomp of the Roman governors, the self-righteousness of the temple priests, and the empty promises of local zealots. He witnessed the suffering of his people, the crushing weight of poverty, and the arbitrary cruelty of power, and a deep sense of rebellion began to stir within him. Dismas was a free spirit, yes, but also a lost one. He yearned for a freedom that transcended the physical, a liberation that no political uprising or act of defiance seemed capable of delivering. His early life was a series of misguided attempts to find this freedom. He might have joined groups of bandits, not out of malice, but out of a desperate, perhaps naive belief that by disrupting the established order, he could somehow carve out a space for true liberty. He was a thief, not necessarily of material possessions, but of the very notion of order imposed by a system he instinctively felt was flawed, even fundamentally unjust. His actions, though criminal in the eyes of the law, were driven by a profound, if unarticulated, search for a higher truth, a genuine purpose in a world that seemed to offer only illusion and despair. He was a product of his time, a young man, grappling with the existential questions that gnawed at the edges of society. Why was there so much suffering? Why did the righteous often perish while the wicked prospered? Why did the very institutions that claim to speak for God seem so disconnected from the true spirit of compassion and justice? These were the unspoken questions that fueled his restless soul, pushing him towards the margins, towards a life outside the conventional boundaries. He was, in essence, a seeker, though he might not have recognized himself as such. His rebellion was a cry for authenticity, a desperate attempt to break free from the chains of a reality he instinctively felt was not entirely real. This inner turmoil, this yearning for something more, set him apart. It made him receptive, perhaps unconsciously, to the subtle currents of esoteric thought that permeated the hidden corners of Judea. He may have encountered whispers of ancient wisdom, perhaps from reclusive Essenes in desert caves, or from wandering mystics who spoke of a light within, a divine spark that connected all beings to a source beyond the visible heavens. These fleeting encounters, these fragments of gnosis, would have resonated deeply with his own disillusionment, offering a tantalizing glimpse of a freedom far grander than any he had yet conceived. The stage was set, a world steeped in illusion, a hidden truth waiting to be revealed, and a young man, a rebel and a seeker, unknowingly on a collision course with destiny. His life, seemingly one of crime and defiance, was in fact a profound, if circuitous, journey towards a truth that would ultimately be unveiled on a hill outside Jerusalem, not just for him, but for all who dare to look beyond the veil. The restless spirit of Dismas continued its tumultuous journey through the arid lands of Judea. His reputation as a formidable outlaw grew, whispered in hushed tones from market stalls to desert encampments. He was a master of evasion, a phantom, in the night, striking at the Roman convoys and the coffers of the wealthy, always with a peculiar sense of justice guiding his hand. He took from those who exploited, and often what he took found its way into the hands of the truly destitute. Yet, with each successful raid, each daring escape, a hollow echo resonated within him. The thrill was fleeting, the material gains unsatisfying. He had achieved a form of freedom, yes, but it was a freedom from something, not a freedom for anything truly meaningful. He heard the stories, of course, whispers of a Nazarene, a carpenter's son who spoke with authority and performed miracles. Some hailed him as the Messiah, others dismissed him as a charlatan. To Dismas, initially, he was just another voice in the cacophony of prophets and zealots that populated the land. He had seen too many promises crumble, too many movements dissolve into dust. His cynicism, born of a lifetime witnessing the world's inherent brokenness, made him wary of any figure claiming to offer external salvation. He was still searching for something that resonated with the deep, unarticulated ache in his own soul, a yearning for a truth that transcended the political and the mundane. It was during one of his solitary retreats, seeking refuge in the rugged hills after a particularly audacious act of defiance against a Roman tax collector, that Dismas stumbled upon a presence unlike any he had encountered. Deep within a secluded wadi, nestled among ancient olive trees, he found a small, almost invisible dwelling. An old man sat outside. His eyes, though ancient, held a piercing clarity, reflecting a wisdom that seemed to predate time itself. He was not a hermit in the traditional sense, nor a priest. He simply was. This was not a planned meeting, but a convergence of destinies. The old man, whose name, if he had one, was never spoken, offered no judgment, no condemnation for Dismas's life of rebellion. Instead, he offered silence, and then, slowly, words that began to untangle the knots in Dismas's understanding of the world. He spoke not of laws or rituals, but of the nature of reality itself. He spoke of a false creator, a lesser God, who in his ignorance fashioned this material world, believing it to be perfect, yet trapping within it sparks of divine light, fragments of the true, ultimate God. This world, the old man would say, his voice like dry leaves rustling in the wind, is a dream, a shadow play. The suffering you see, the injustice you rail against, these are but symptoms of its fundamental imperfection. The true prison is not the Roman legion, nor the temple walls, but the illusion that this shadow play is all there is. Dismas, accustomed to the harsh realities of survival, found these words both unsettling and profoundly resonant. They explained the gnawing emptiness he felt even in victory, the sense that something was fundamentally off about the world. The old man's teachings were not about morality in the conventional sense, but about gnosis, a knowing that transcended belief, a direct intuitive understanding of one's own divine origin. He spoke of the pneuma, the spirit, the divine spark trapped within the soma, the body, and the psyche, the soul, which was often swayed by the illusions of the material world. The Nazarene, the old man mused one evening, his gaze fixed on the distant stars, is not come to die for your sins, for sin is but a misunderstanding of your true nature. He is come to reveal the truth, to awaken the pneuma within. He is a lamp in the darkness of the demiurge's creation, showing the way back to the pleroma, the fullness of the true God. This was a radical departure from anything Dismas had ever heard. It reframed his entire existence. His anger at injustice, his rebellion against authority, suddenly made sense. He wasn't just fighting against men, he was fighting against the very fabric of a flawed reality. His crimes were, in a strange way, an unconscious striving for a freedom that the world could not offer. The old man's words were not a call to abandon his life, but to understand it, to see his actions through a new lens. Yet this newfound understanding brought its own set of internal conflicts. How could he reconcile the call to inner knowledge, to transcend the material, with his life of action, his visceral need to fight against the tangible injustices he witnessed daily? Was his struggle against the Romans and the corrupt elite a futile endeavor if the true battle was within? The old man never gave direct answers, only more questions, more parables that forced Dismas to look inward. He spoke of the true wealth not being gold or silver, but the gnosis that liberates the soul. He spoke of true freedom not being the absence of chains, but the realization that one was never truly bound. Dismas found himself caught between two worlds. The world of action, where he was a master of his own fate, a force to be reckoned with, and the world of contemplation, where he was a novice, grappling with concepts that shook the very foundations of his being. He would leave the old man, returning to his life of daring exploits, but now the echoes of the Gnostic teachings followed him. He saw the faces of his victims, not just as oppressors, but as fellow prisoners in the demiurge's illusion. He saw the suffering of the poor, not just as a consequence of human greed, but as a symptom of a deeper cosmic flaw. His heart, once fueled by righteous anger, now held a strange mix of compassion and a profound sense of detachment. He was still a rebel, but his rebellion was evolving. It was no longer just against external forces, but against the very ignorance that kept humanity enslaved. He was not yet fully enlightened, far from it. The path to gnosis was long and arduous, fraught with self-deception and the allure of the material. But the seeds had been sown. The young man who had once met Jesus as a boy, now decades later, was beginning to understand the true nature of the light that emanated from him. And this understanding, slowly blossoming within his soul, was preparing him for an encounter far more profound than any he could have imagined, an encounter that would culminate on a desolate hill, under the gaze of a world that understood so little. The whispers of the Nazarene grew louder, carried on the wind from Galilee across the Jordan and into the very heart of Judea. He spoke of a kingdom, not of this world, yet within it. He healed the sick, cast out demons, and challenged the very foundations of the religious establishment. To the common folk, he was a miracle worker, a prophet. To the authorities, a dangerous revolutionary. But to Dismas, now steeped in the esoteric wisdom imparted by the old man of the Wadi, Jesus was something far more profound. He was the living embodiment of the gnosis, the very revelation the old man had spoken of. Dismas, though still living a life on the fringes, found himself drawn to the stories of this Jesus. He heard how Jesus spoke in parables, riddles designed to conceal truth from the uninitiated, while revealing it to those with inner understanding. "He who has ears to hear, let him hear," Jesus would often say, a phrase that resonated deeply with Dismas's own journey into hidden knowledge. The old man had taught him that the world was full of veils, and only those who sought the truth with an open heart could pierce them. Jesus, it seemed, was doing just that, but on a scale that dwarfed Dismas's solitary quest. The central conflict, the profound mystery that began to unfold for Dismas, was the stark contrast between the external world's perception of Jesus and the deeper Gnostic reality he represented. The masses saw a political liberator, a king who would overthrow Rome. The religious leaders saw a blasphemer, a threat to their power. But Dismas, through the lens of Gnosis, began to see a different Jesus entirely. He saw a being of light, a messenger from the Pleroma, the true divine realm, sent to awaken the sleeping sparks of divinity within humanity. This challenged everything. If Jesus was indeed a revealer of Gnosis, then his mission was not about earthly kingdoms or ritualistic purity, but about liberation from the very fabric of the material world, the domain of the demiurge. This was a radical, almost terrifying thought. It meant that the suffering, the injustice, the very laws of the physical universe were not divinely ordained in the way most believed, but were part of a flawed, imperfect creation. It meant that true salvation was not about appeasing an angry God, but about recognizing the divine within oneself and transcending the illusion. Dismas began to connect the dots. The old man had spoken of the demiurge's ignorance, his belief that he was the only God, and how he had trapped divine light within human bodies. Jesus, in his teachings, spoke of a Father who was distinct from the God of the Old Testament, a Father of light and truth, who existed beyond the confines of this material world. He spoke of being born again, not of water, but of spirit, a clear echo of the Gnostic concept of awakening the pneuma, the divine spark. When Jesus declared, "My kingdom is not of this world," Dismas understood this not as a political statement, but as a profound Gnostic truth. His true domain was the Pleroma, the realm of pure light and knowledge, far removed from the demiurge's flawed creation. The evidence for Dismas was not in scrolls or ancient texts, but in the very resonance of Jesus' words with the Gnostic wisdom he had absorbed. He heard tales of Jesus telling his disciples, "You are gods," a statement that would be considered blasphemous by the temple authorities, but which, to a Gnostic, was the ultimate truth, a recognition of the divine spark within every human being. He heard of Jesus speaking of hidden things, of mysteries revealed only to a select few, aligning perfectly with the esoteric nature of Gnosis. This deepening understanding brought with it a profound sense of isolation. Dismas could no longer fully participate in the world as he once had. His acts of rebellion, once fueled by a simple desire for justice, now felt like mere skirmishes in a much larger cosmic battle against ignorance and illusion. He saw the Roman soldiers not just as oppressors, but as unwitting agents of the demiurge, enforcing the laws of a flawed system. He saw the temple priests not just as corrupt, but as blind guides, leading their flock further into the labyrinth of material illusion. His own life, once defined by action, began to shift. He still moved through the shadows, but his purpose was subtly changing. He was no longer just a thief in the conventional sense. He was a disruptor of false realities, a living challenge to the established order, driven by an inner compulsion to expose the truth. He began to see his own capture and eventual condemnation as an inevitable consequence of living authentically in a world built on deception. It was a dangerous path, one that few dared to tread, for the price of Gnosis, of true knowledge, was often ostracization, persecution, and even death. The more he understood, the more he realized the immense stakes involved. The forces of the demiurge, represented by the earthly powers that sought to maintain control and suppress true knowledge, would inevitably clash with the light of the revealer. This was the central conflict, not just for Jesus, but for anyone who dared to awaken to the Gnosis. It was a battle for the very soul of humanity, a struggle between the illusion of the material world and the liberating truth of the divine spark. Dismas, the outlaw, the seeker, the reluctant student of Gnosis, found himself increasingly drawn into this cosmic drama. He knew with a certainty that transcended mere belief that his path, once seemingly random and rebellious, was now converging with that of the Nazarene. The boy he had met decades ago, the man who now spoke of hidden kingdoms and inner light, was destined to confront the very powers that held humanity captive. And Dismas, by a twist of fate, or perhaps by divine design, was destined to be there. Not as a mere bystander, but as a silent witness, a fellow traveler on the path to ultimate liberation. The stage was being set for a confrontation that would redefine salvation, not as an external act, but as an internal awakening, a final profound act of gnosis on the very hill of skulls. The path of gnosis, once a faint whisper in the desert, now roared like a torrent within Dismas. The teachings of the old man, once abstract concepts, found their living embodiment in the figure of Jesus. Dismas, the outlaw, the rebel, began to see the world not through the eyes of a common man, but through the profound, often unsettling lens of the Gnostic. Every word Jesus uttered, every act he performed, seemed to confirm the hidden truths that had been slowly unveiled to Dismas. Consider the words attributed to Jesus in texts that would later be suppressed, hidden away, or reinterpreted to fit a different narrative. In the Gospel of Thomas, a collection of sayings, Jesus declares, "If you bring forth what is within you, what you have will save you. If you do not have that within you, what you do not have within you will kill you." This was not a message of external salvation through ritual or sacrifice, but a radical call to inner awakening. For Dismas, who had spent a lifetime seeking freedom in the external world, this resonated with a profound truth. The salvation was not from an angry God, but from the ignorance of one's own divine nature. The sin was not an offense against an external deity, but agnosis, the lack of self-knowledge, the failure to recognize the divine spark within. This concept of sin as ignorance fundamentally reshaped Dismas's understanding of his own life. His crimes were not acts of inherent evil, but misguided attempts to find liberation in a world designed to keep souls enslaved. He was not a sinner in need of redemption through blood, but a soul in need of gnosis, a knowing that would free him from the illusions of the demiurge's creation. Jesus, then, was not a redeemer in the traditional sense, but a revealer, a guide sent from the true ultimate God, the Pleroma, to illuminate the path back to the source. The kingdom of God, a phrase so central to Jesus' teachings, also took on a new, startling meaning. While many expected a political kingdom, a physical realm where Israel would reign supreme, Jesus consistently spoke of it as something internal. "The kingdom of God is within you," he proclaimed, a statement found in the Gospel of Luke, but amplified and clarified in Gnostic texts. For Dismas, this was the ultimate liberation. No longer was he waiting for an external savior or a future paradise. The paradise, the true realm of light, was accessible here and now, within the awakened consciousness. It was a state of being, not a place. Even the concept of resurrection, so central to later Christian dogma, was viewed differently through the Gnostic lens. It wasn't merely a physical rising from the dead, but a spiritual awakening that could occur during life. To be resurrected was to awaken from the sleep of ignorance, to realize one's true divine self while still in the physical body. This was the true miracle, the profound transformation that Jesus offered. He wasn't just promising a future life, he was offering a way to live fully, divinely, in the present. The symbolism of the cross itself, for the Gnostics, transcended its literal meaning as an instrument of torture. It became a profound cosmic symbol. The vertical beam represented the divine spirit descending into the material world, and the horizontal beam, the material world itself, with its limitations and suffering. The intersection, the point of crucifixion, was the place where spirit and matter met, where the soul could transcend the physical and ascend back to its divine origin. It was a symbol of the ultimate liberation from the material prison, a doorway to the Pleroma. Jesus' presence on it, then, was not just a sacrifice but a demonstration of this ultimate transcendence, a living allegory for the path to gnosis. Dismas, through his unique journey, began to see these layers of meaning. He saw the Pharisees and Sadducees not just as religious opponents, but as unwitting agents of the demiurge, enforcing laws and rituals that kept humanity bound to the material realm. Their focus on external purity, on adherence to rigid commandments, was a distraction from the true inner work of Gnosis. He saw the Roman Empire, with its brutal power and obsession with control, as the ultimate manifestation of the demiurge's dominion over the physical world. The more he understood, the more isolated he felt, yet paradoxically, the more connected he became to a deeper, unseen reality. His life as an outlaw, once a desperate struggle for survival and a misguided quest for freedom, now seemed to be a preparation. He had always been an outsider, a rebel against the established order. Now, he understood why. He was rebelling against the very illusion of the world, against the demiurge's flawed creation. His actions, once driven by instinct, were now imbued with a cosmic significance. He heard tales of Jesus' final journey to Jerusalem, the growing tension, the inevitable clash with the authorities. Dismas knew, with a chilling certainty, that this confrontation was not merely political or religious. It was a cosmic battle, a revelation of truth against the forces of ignorance and illusion. And in this ultimate confrontation, Dismas felt an undeniable pull, a magnetic force drawing him towards the very epicenter of this spiritual storm. His own capture, which would come swiftly and brutally, was not a random act of fate, but a convergence, a preordained alignment with the destiny of the Revealer. He was being drawn to the cross, not as a mere criminal, but as a witness, a participant, and ultimately a testament to the liberating power of Gnosis. The stage was set, not just for a crucifixion, but for a profound, final act of revelation that would challenge the very nature of salvation and the meaning of human existence. Dismas's life, forged in rebellion and an unyielding quest for a greater truth, seemed to converge towards an inevitable point. The web of destiny, or perhaps the hand of the demiurge, tightened around him. His capture came not as a shock, but almost as an acceptance. He had defied the laws of the material world for too long, operating in the shadows, yet always with a purpose that transcended mere banditry. Now, the Roman authorities, with their brutal efficiency and their disdain for human life, finally cornered him. There was no grand battle, only the resignation of a man who knew his time in physical freedom had come to an end. He was dragged, beaten, and thrown into a dark cell, one among many, awaiting the verdict of a justice he knew to be blind to true light. The journey to Jerusalem, shackled and humiliated, was a procession of pain and reflection. Each step on the dusty roads was a reminder of the impermanence of the body, the fragility of material existence, but paradoxically, it was also a catalyst for unprecedented mental clarity. The words of the old sage from the Wadi echoed in his mind. The body is a prison, but the mind can be free. And the parables of Jesus, which he had heard from afar, now seemed to fit together like pieces of a cosmic puzzle. He was a prisoner of the demiurge, yes, but gnosis, inner knowledge, was the key to true liberation. The holy city buzzed with the energy of Passover, a celebration of liberation that for Dismas seemed a cruel irony. Thousands of pilgrims, priests, soldiers, all trapped in their own illusions, their own searches for external salvation. He observed the crowd with a mixture of compassion and a strange sense of superiority. They sought a Messiah who would free them from the Roman yoke, while he, Dismas, sought liberation from the very yoke of matter itself. Then the moment arrived. On the way to Golgotha, the hill of the skull, a place of execution and despair, the procession stopped. The crowd stirred shouts and insults mingling with the crack of whips, and it was there, amidst the chaos and cruelty, that Dismas saw him. A man also carrying his cross, stumbling under the weight, his face marked by pain, but his eyes carried a light that Dismas recognized instantly. It was not the light of an earthly king, nor that of a common prophet. It was the light of Gnosis, the same light the old sage had described, the same light he had felt in his own awakening. And then, the shock. A memory, dormant for decades, erupted into his consciousness with the force of lightning. That face, though aged and disfigured by suffering, was unmistakable. The boy. The young man he had met so many years ago in a forgotten Galilean village, the penetrating gaze, the precocious wisdom, the simple yet profound words that had planted a seed of unrest in his young soul. It was Jesus, the Nazarene, the Revealer. This was the first and most profound turning point. It was not merely a coincidence, a random encounter of two condemned men. It was a convergence of destinies, a cosmic alignment that transcended human understanding. Dismas, the thief, the rebel, the Gnostic seeker, was about to be crucified, alongside the very master of Gnosis. The irony was brutal, but the revelation was sublime. The world, in its ignorance, saw two criminals and a blasphemer. But Dismas, with his newly opened eyes of Gnosis, saw the demiurge manifesting his fury against the light, and the light, in its infinite wisdom, using the very instrument of its oppression as a stage for the final revelation. Dismas's mind reeled. That childhood encounter had not been an accident. The words of the young Jesus, which at the time seemed enigmatic, now revealed themselves as veiled prophecies. He had been marked, chosen, perhaps unconsciously, for this journey. His life of rebellion, his quests, his encounters with hidden wisdom, everything had been a preparation for this moment. He was not merely a condemned man. He was a participant in a cosmic drama, a living testament to the Gnostic truth. The crowd clamored for blood. The soldiers carried out orders. The priests watched with satisfaction. No one, except perhaps a few initiates, understood the depth of what was about to happen. The crucifixion, for most, was a spectacle of punishment, but for Dismas and for Jesus, it was the culmination of a journey, the ultimate demonstration of Gnosis. The body would be destroyed, but the divine spark, the pneuma, would be liberated. The idea that the Messiah and a criminal would be crucified together was, to the Gnostic mind, a powerful paradox. It was not a blemish on Jesus' divinity, but a confirmation of his mission. He did not come to save the righteous, but to awaken the lost, the marginalized, those who, like Dismas, were trapped in the illusions of the material world. Dismas's presence beside Jesus on the cross was not an accident, but a symbol. He represented humanity imprisoned, yet with the capacity to awaken, to recognize the light, even in the darkest moment. The crucifixion, then, was not merely a historical event of suffering, but an act of revelation. Jesus' body, the temple of the Revealer, would be broken, but his message, his gnosis, would be eternally liberated. And Dismas, the thief who met Jesus as a boy, was there to witness, to participate, and ultimately, in his last moments, to ascend to true freedom. The stage was set for the climax, not of a tragedy, but of a transmutation, where pain would become a portal, and death, the path to Gnosis. The air on Golgotha was thick with the scent of sweat, blood, and fear. The crosses were erected, 3 silhouettes against the unforgiving sky. To the world, it was the end of 3 lives. For Dismas, it was the beginning of an understanding that transcended death itself. The physical pain was excruciating, each breath an agony, each movement a torment. But strangely, there was a mental clarity, a lucidity that the pain seemed to intensify rather than obscure. It was as if the body, in its final agony, was detaching, allowing the mind, the pneuma, to ascend. Beside him, Jesus, the Master, the Revealer, hanging on the central cross. The crowd mocked. The soldiers gambled for his garments. The priests sneered. "If you are the Christ, save yourself and us," they cried. The other thief to Jesus' left echoed the scorn, his soul still trapped in ignorance, unable to see beyond the pain and humiliation. But Dismas, he saw. He saw the light in Jesus' eyes, a light that did not diminish even in the face of imminent death. It was then that the words that would resonate through the centuries, were uttered, not as a plea for forgiveness of sins, but as a recognition, a supplication for Gnosis. Dismas, his voice hoarse with pain but charged with a newfound conviction, turned to Jesus. "Jesus," he managed to murmur, "remember me when you come into your kingdom." This was not the plea of a repentant criminal seeking a place in an earthly paradise. It was the declaration of a Gnostic seeker who had finally understood. Jesus' kingdom was not a physical throne, but the pleroma, the divine fullness, the realm of pure light and knowledge from which the revealer had come. Dismas's request was to be remembered not in a worldly sense, but for his divine spark, his pneuma, to be recognized and guided back to the source, alongside the Master. He was not asking for salvation from hell, but liberation from illusion, and Jesus' response for Dismas was the final confirmation of everything he had learned. Truly I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise. This paradise was not an Edenic garden, nor a heaven of clouds and angels. It was the pleroma, the state of gnosis, the union with divinity. The word today did not signify chronological time, but a state of consciousness, the immediate liberation of the soul through the recognition of truth. Jesus was not promising a distant future, but an instantaneous transmutation, a spiritual ascent that would occur at the very moment of physical death. The crucifixion, in this Gnostic context, was not a blood sacrifice to atone for sins, but a final demonstration of the soul's liberation from the material body. Jesus' death was not a punishment, but a voluntary act of detachment, a supreme example of how the divine spark can transcend the shackles of the demiurge. And Dismas's presence beside him, a man who had lived on the fringes, who had sought freedom in the wrong places, but who finally found gnosis, was living proof that this liberation was available to all, regardless of their past, provided there was inner awakening. Dismas's physical agony became a portal. Every muscle spasm, every excruciating pain was a step towards transcendence. He was not dying, he was liberating himself. The body, the prison of flesh and bone, was dissolving, allowing the pneuma, the divine spark, to detach. The pain was the purifying fire, burning away the last vestiges of illusion. The reflection on this climax is profound. The scene on Golgotha, so central to Christian faith, is radically redefined. It is not a story of guilt and redemption through vicarious suffering, but a narrative of awakening and liberation through knowledge. The good thief is not good because of his penitence, but because of his gnosis, his ability to recognize truth amidst illusion. He is the archetype of the seeker, the rebel who, through a life of questioning and searching, finally finds the light. The ignorance of the crowd, the soldiers, the religious leaders, is the most striking contrast. They see a failure, a defeat, the death of a man. But Dismas and Jesus see a triumph, an ascent, the liberation of the soul. Jesus' cry, "It is finished," is not a lament, but a declaration of victory. The mission to reveal gnosis was complete. Dismas's death on the cross was not a tragic end, but a Gnostic triumph. He was not saved from the world, but from the demiurge, from illusion. His soul, now free, ascended to the pleroma, guided by the light of the revealer. The cross, which to the world was a symbol of shame and death, became for Dismas the portal to true life, the life of gnosis. He, the thief, had stolen the greatest of all riches, the knowledge of himself and his true divine origin. The sun finally set over Golgotha, casting long shadows over the 3 empty crosses. The spectacle had ended for the crowd, who now dispersed, carrying with them their own interpretations and prejudices. But for those with eyes to see and ears to hear, the true drama had only just begun. The death of Jesus and the ascent of Dismas were not the end, but the beginning of a silent legacy, an underground current of wisdom that would continue to flow through the centuries, often hidden but never completely extinguished. The official story, the one that would be canonized and preached for millennia, would focus on sacrifice, on redemption through blood, on obedience to the law. But the Gnostic truth, whispered in apocryphal texts and preserved in secret communities, would tell a different story, a story where the crucifixion was not primarily about the atonement for sins, but about the revelation of gnosis, the liberation of the soul from the prison of matter. Jesus' body, the temple of the revealer, was broken, but his message, his light, was released to illuminate the path for all who sought inner truth. Dismas, the good thief, became the archetype of the Gnostic seeker. His journey, from a disillusioned rebel to a man who achieved gnosis at the moment of his death, is a powerful testament. He was not a saint in the traditional sense, but a flawed human being who, through his own search and a providential encounter, managed to transcend the illusion of the world. His story reminds us that gnosis is not reserved for the pure or the perfect, but for those who dare to question, who yearn for a deeper truth, and who are willing to look within even when the external world crumbles. Jesus' legacy, viewed through the Gnostic lens, is not that of a savior who demands blind faith, but that of a guide who illuminates the path to self-knowledge. He did not come to create a new religion, but to awaken the inherent divinity within each of us. His words, often distorted or misunderstood, were keys to unlocking the mysteries of the universe and the self. The salvation he offered was not a ticket to an afterlife heaven, but liberation from ignorance and suffering in this life, through the recognition of the divine spark. The cross, then, ceases to be merely a symbol of pain and sacrifice. It transforms into a cosmic map. The vertical post represents the connection between the pleroma, the realm of light, and the material world. The horizontal arm symbolizes the extent of material illusion, the dualities and sufferings of this world. And the point of intersection, where Jesus and Dismas met, is the portal, the point of gnosis, where the soul can transcend matter and ascend back to its true origin. It is a reminder that, even at the lowest point of material existence, the opportunity for spiritual liberation is present. The story of Dismas and Jesus on the cross is an invitation to question established narratives, to seek the hidden truths that have been suppressed, and to look within oneself for gnosis. It is a reminder that the true battle is not against flesh and blood, but against the forces of ignorance that keep us imprisoned, and that the true victory is not about power or control, but about the liberation of the soul. What will you do with this truth? Will you continue to see the cross as a symbol of external sacrifice, or will you recognize it as a portal to your own gnosis? The choice, as always, is yours. For the journey to true freedom is not about blindly following, but about awakening, about recognizing the light that has always been within you, waiting to be revealed. And perhaps, just perhaps, the story of the thief who met Jesus as a boy and decades later was crucified beside him is the key to unlocking your own path to enlightenment.